Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City, and especially welcome to all of you, our children and youth who are in our religious education program. This is your church. This is your place. I don't welcome you to it so much as welcome you back, right? So I am Reverend Monica Dobbins. I'm the assistant minister, and I'm talking to you first this morning. And I want to talk about the subject of our sermon today, which is tolerance. What does that mean, tolerance? What does it mean to have tolerance? To be in between, to not hate something and not like something, to kind of take the middle way. Yeah, okay. Hannah? Okay, kind of not caring. What do you think? Oh, okay. You're annoyed about it, but you have no choice. That is. You don't need the sermon. That's more, right. You're preaching the sermon for us. That's more tolerating something in terms of like putting up with it. But when we talk about the way that we live together in society and the way that we are together, there's a more positive way to think about tolerance. What do you think? Accepting something even though it's different. Bingo. That's exactly what I was looking for. Tolerance and acceptance are similar to each other, right? So we accept people and ideas that are different from our own or different from ourselves. So I have some fun bags up here. Let's see what this bag. This is a bag that has a symbol of a religion. What religion do you think this is? Islam. What's in this bag? It's a Quran, right? That's the holy book of Islam. And here's a different symbol. Does anybody know this one? This is the wheel, and that's a symbol of Buddhism. So here's the Lotus Sutra. That's one of the scriptures of Buddhism. Did you know Buddhism had scriptures? No. Oh yeah, it's got lots of scripture. A lot. Here's some beads that some Buddhists use for praying. That might be in their bag. Here's another bag. Yeah. I think that's Christian. That's right, Christianity. So there's a Bible in this bag. That's their scriptures. And they also sometimes use prayer beads, right? And here's a little Jesus, little cartoon Jesus. I like him. So now what about this one? Does anybody recognize this? That's our religion. What's our religion? I'll give you a clue. We are Unitarian Universalists. That's our religion. And guess what? Sometimes you could put one bag inside another bag, or you could have a bag with more than one. Because you know what? When we're born as babies, do we have beliefs? No. We gather beliefs as we grow, as we learn, as we interact with people, and we go through our life collecting beliefs, and we put some new beliefs in our bag, and then sometimes we grow out of things, right? We might take some things out of our bag. Now, let me ask you a question. Everybody in the world has a belief bag. What do you think is okay to do with your belief bag? Should you hide it where nobody can see it? Should you pretend you don't have any beliefs? No, it's okay to let people know what you believe. Is it okay to use your bag as a weapon and beat people up with your beliefs? No. Is that tolerance? No. We hold our bags lightly, right? Now let me ask something else. Is it okay to keep your bag closed where none of your beliefs can get out, where new beliefs can't get in? No. How should we hold our bag? Let's hold it kind of loosely where we can look in there once in a while and see what's in. Oh, wait, how did that get in there? Man, that was a mess. All right. Now, what if you just didn't have anything in there? Would that make sense? If you had no beliefs, if your bag was empty? Well, the truth is that we all have beliefs, whether we think we do or we not. We all have beliefs. And the important thing is to keep a loose hold on your beliefs, to look at them once in a while, make sure that you still believe that stuff, and to be open to the beliefs of other people. Does that sound like something that we can do? That sounds like good Unitarian Universalism, right? Rock. Okay. I would like to ask you very quietly and respectfully to stand, and we'll go out to your RE class today. Oh, wait, stop. Oh, we didn't light the chalice. Boy, now who's not a Unitarian Universalist? Oh. Okay, everybody have a seat. Sit down, sit down, sit down. Thank you for quietly and respectfully sitting down. We have a family who's going to come forward and light the chalice, the Hartel family. This is Polly and Thomas. And let me tell you, Thomas is so super stoked to be lighting the chalice this morning. And Sister's going to help. Okay. All right, Thomas, remember what we did here? I'd like for you to hold this. We will stand up quietly and go to our RE program. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit, and let's sing together number 144. I invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer, meditation, or reflection as you hear these words from the Unitarian Universalist minister, Reverend Harry Meserve. From arrogance, pompousness, and thinking ourselves more important than we are, may some saving sense of humor liberate us. For allowing ourselves to ridicule the faith of others, may we be forgiven. From making war and calling it justice, indifference and calling it tolerance, pollution and calling it progress, may we be cured. For telling ourselves and others that evil is inevitable while good is impossible, may we stand corrected. God of our mixed up, tragic, aspiring, doubting, and insurgent lives, help us to be as good in our hearts as we have always wanted to be. Let us give ourselves the gift of silence as we ponder these things. Amen, and blessed be. One of my greatest theological concerns these days is also one of the oldest, and I mean going way, way back to the first two of the 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Yes, I'm worried about idolatry. Idolatry is the practice of projecting some element of oneself and worshiping it as though it were real and as if it were godlike in power. Money, reputation, control, these are some of the most common idols, and we are all guilty from time to time of making idols for ourselves. Now, I readily admit that this is probably not at the top of most people's list of great concerns. Probably doesn't make your list at all. I also readily admit that this concern might be symptomatic of my rather geeky obsession with theology. But it's also because I come from a culture suffering from an unusual and alarming idolatry, one which threatens to undermine democracy and American society. I come from Alabama, often referred to as the buckle of the Bible Belt, the punching bag of liberal America, a name synonymous with undereducation and poverty and ignorance, where people talk slow and think slower, where people vote against their self-interest, where people, as Barack Obama once said, cling to guns or religion or antipathy to people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment or anti-trade sentiment as a way to explain their frustrations. I love my home state. I weep to hear it thus described, even when I know that the stereotypes are too often true. And I recognize that the source of these problems is idolatry. Yes, idolatry. And you won't believe what their idol is. Oddly enough, their idol is God. Now, who is God? What is God? In Jewish culture, there are many nicknames for God, but the true name of God is never said, because to give God a name immediately shrinks God to a size that we can understand. But the problem is, the only God that could be real is one that is too large for human comprehension. Once God becomes small enough to hold in your mind or to hold in your hands, it's an idol. It will necessarily be a projection of one's own fears, hopes, desires, assumptions. It will have been made in our image rather than the other way around. From the comfortable seats in our progressive palaces, we may wonder how Alabamians can be so hypocritical as to countenance the possibility of electing an accused child molester to the Senate as their representative. But the evangelical Christian majority of Alabama are not hypocrites. They are voting their conscience, which is not yet strained by the shameful accusations against the Republican candidate. Why? Because in their worldview, the world, the universe, is under God's control, with an inscrutable divine purpose behind everything that happens. And how do they worship this idol? Evangelical commentator Caitlin Sheese recently told the New York Times that a new ritual has superseded Sunday worship and weeknight Bible studies, a profane devotional practice with immense power to shape evangelical beliefs. This liturgy is the nightly consumption of conservative cable news. The reason Fox News is so formative is that it's this repetitive, almost ritualistic thing that people do every night. It forms in them particular fears and desires, an idea of America. This is convincing on a less than logical level, and the church is not communicating to them in that same way. For a group of people who claims to believe so strongly that God is in control, it's heartbreaking to me how fervently they defend God and look to this new worship ritual to reinforce their conception of God, as if God is indefensible and weak, as though God is not in control, as if their real fear is that God is actually out of control and they are actually helpless before God's fury. Idolatry is not the exclusive purview of conservatives. It is such a human thing to do. Ralph Waldo Emerson once said that a person will worship something. Have no doubt about that. That which dominates our imaginations and our thoughts will determine our lives and our character. Therefore, it behooves us to be careful what we are worshiping. For what we are worshiping, we are becoming. What are we worshiping? What are we becoming? If idolatry is a natural human activity, the scratching of the itch to make sense of the universe, then what idols have we erected in our progressive public square? And how do they reflect our own desires, our own weaknesses, our own faults, especially our unexamined ones? I worry when I see progressive friends calling conservatives stupid, ignorant, heartless, making fun of them in one breath, and then arguing that we have to understand them and reach out to them in the next. How can we reach out to people for whom we have open contempt? Remember that to them, we are the intolerable ones. And not only that, we are often seen as intolerant too. Is that how we want to be understood? Is this any way to put our society back together? There's a story about a rich young man who comes to the teacher and asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" The teacher tells him that he must follow all of the commandments. This pleases the young man. That's what he wanted the teacher to tell him anyway. He only came to hear how great he was to begin with. Then the teacher lets the other shoe drop. You must sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Oh, that hurt. The rich young man's idol had been accumulation of wealth. Its feet of clay melted before his eyes, and he went away sorrowful. It's not enough to do all the right things. It's not enough to have a sterling progressive portfolio, or a flawless conservative one for that matter, because what we do is nothing compared to who we are. If we are people of kindness and justice and mercy, we must be that for all people, not just the people on our team. We must smash our idols of contempt and self-righteousness on the temple steps. There is no other way.
I'll get there. Good morning. Thank you. I'd also like to bid you all welcome, and a special warm welcome to those who may be here for the very first time. It's great to have you with us. Glad you found this church community, kind of sitting real snug on the corner of 13th East and 600th South. I hope you will be tolerant if I just run a couple of announcements this morning. Real fast. First of all, just explore all the announcements. It just gives a wonderful, wonderful view of our active participation in the wider community of Salt Lake, as well as all the things that we do here as a social community. You may have noticed on the way in that we have some wonderful handicrafts and wares available for your perusal and purchases. We have, and this is a part of our tradition, we have the Interethnic Health Alliance here, this group specializes in helping artists, helping people in Uganda. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for us to help the artists and their people in Uganda get stronger and find better health care in that country. Also want to mention very quickly that, again, as tradition commands, we have our giving tree up. Those are Christmas wishes for members of and families of the San Esteban Church in West Valley City, which is our sister church. Please grab a list of wishes, and you've got about a week to purchase what that family desires and get it back to us. If you can't make it next Sunday, then hopefully you can drop by the church to drop off your gift before the 13th. And last but not least, I want to mention, our caring network is moving into new directions and is trying to be really, really effective. And under the leadership and guidance of Monica Dobbins, we're going to have a training session tomorrow night with a potluck dinner. And so do come. Bring your dish and just learn how we can really be effective as a community, helping each other in times of need. You never know when that's going to happen. The offering will now gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another and bid each other a good morning. The university's orthopedic center in Research Park is undergoing major renovations. Some of us are in a position to notice. In order to cross the mounds of construction debris between the parking lot and the entrance, they've erected something like a drawbridge to help patients gain access to the building. It's a rather narrow walkway, and on my first venture to physical therapy, I walked by myself onto the drawbridge as though I were the Tin Man, just receiving the first squirt of oil to kind of move things along. And I noticed approaching me was a young woman, perhaps in her late 20s, walking awkwardly in my direction with the help of a cane. I wondered if we would be able to pass each other without any kind of a slapstick kind of comic relief thing. But I thought there was something noticeably different about her. She appeared a little misshapen. As we were within earshot of each other, I said, "Do you think we're going to make it without knocking into each other and bumping each other off here?" And she kind of laughed and she said, "I hope so." And then she took a hard look at me and said, "What happened to you?" And so we both stopped for a moment and chatted, making light of stupid accidents. She had a deep reserve of encouraging comments which flowed from her just effortlessly. She made me feel quite hopeful. But I picked up that there was something different about her. So rather than ask, "What happened to you?" I said something like, "So, what's your situation?" And she said, "I have cerebral palsy." I asked her if physical therapy helped, and she said, "Yeah." She said, "It really did." Well, by now other people were in our view expecting to get by us, so we wished each other well and continued on our way. You know, I have never in my life stopped my usual quick gait long enough to have a conversation, let alone even notice someone with disabilities, unless they happen to be part of our church community. I've always considered myself a very tolerant person, but was I? You see, tolerance is viewed mostly as a virtue, and so wanting to be virtuous, like most of us, I figured that in all cases, mostly hypothetical, I would always expand my sympathies freely to those who found themselves outside of life's fast-paced norms. But in my privilege and power, which enables me to conduct my daily business swiftly without really ever having to exercise this virtue of tolerance, I became aware of my patterns that conveniently bypass those who so easily fall away from life's mainstream. Now, all of this is a way of saying that tolerance is less a matter of principle than it is a matter of power. Tolerance is less about principle. It's really about power. Having my own mobility significantly clipped this past month, a new perspective of fairness, inclusion, understanding, even helplessness began to take shape. It became transparently obvious that those in society who decide the limits of toleration in a wider public context, those who determine what will or will not be deemed acceptable, are not those of the minority persuasion, for whom tolerance is presumably a protection. Those who determine the limits of tolerance, or better yet, those who define its very meaning, are those who hold the majority sentiment. Historically, maintaining the comfort of the status quo has always been of vital interest among those in power. And as William Sloane Coffin often reminded us, the duty of the police is to safeguard the status quo, whereby the police enforce the norms established by those in power. Tolerance, then, becomes a virtue under the control of the powerful. The powerful determine how much the variation in behavior and opinion with which it does not agree will it be willing to endure. The implications for democracy of exactly where those in power draw the line between what they will accept or refuse to accept can shake the very foundation of democracy itself. Going back some in time, this was all recognized. John Locke addressed the elastic nature of tolerance, suggesting that moral rules need to be imposed in order to preserve civil society. But the problem, especially that which we are encountering most acutely today, the problem is that those who currently hold the reins of power are those who also determine the moral rules for our society. We despair today like never before. We despair because the moral fabric has frayed beyond what seems to be repairable. We find ourselves literally in a state of mourning because a civil society has died in our lifetime. We're watching it die. Now, in a pluralistic society, we may reason all voices and all perspectives have a right to be heard. In fact, not only do all voices have a right to be heard, but also must have the means to be heard. The grounding of tolerance in a democratic society presupposes some parity between competing parties in terms, for example, of access to the media, access to the internet, and of course, access to the voting booth. Now, we are witnessing today the failure to tolerate diverse views with the consequences of increased repression. Failure to tolerate diverse views is repression. Failure to tolerate diverse views is repression. Today's issues of net equality, disparaging the mainstream media, limiting access to the polls among people of color, make us tremble with fear as we fast approach an intolerant society, which by definition borders or even has become a repressive society. Now, the right-leaning Congress of our day has ordered election officials in 248 counties of mostly minority voters to prune their rolls of eligible voters. This raises a concern that far exceeds keeping the numbers correct on those who have died or moved out of that county. It includes identifying ineligible felons. Now, as this procedure was ordered by the Florida legislature just before the 2000 presidential election, the resulting purge misidentified thousands of minority voters as criminals, preventing them from casting their votes. As you may recall, George Bush took Florida by a mere 537 vote margin. And so now the order by Congress today to perform a repeat of purging the voting rolls reveals a shrinking desire for anything resembling tolerance. And when you add to that the overt effort to repress Muslims, Hispanics, in fact, all immigrant voices, and where the message of white nationalism and white supremacy has gained favor among those in power, why then the appeal to tolerance yields to the courts. We want the courts now to exercise civil liberties, human rights, to help reestablish moral rules in order to preserve a civil society. As the conservative right raises the stakes as to the extent it will endorse repression among people of color in a multicultural society, as attacks on the media, science, and women have become routine, as an unapologetic effort to make the rich richer despite the trade-off of health care for more than 13 million of the nation's poor, as history is being rewritten to retain Confederate statues, and members of white supremacy groups have been normalized, the issue of free speech has emerged now as a giant question that deals with preserving the fundamentals of a free society while also trying to limit the voices of hate and repression. Kind of a tug of war. Now, there's no doubt that a free society sets limits to free speech only at its gravest peril. But the question of our time is whether or not we have now reached this perilous tipping point where the normalization of hatred needs to be expelled. And furthermore, what might happen if we set no limits at all to what is deemed tolerable by the current government in power? What if we set no limits at all? Now, this poses a quandary, especially for liberals. Much of the drama has played out on the campus of UC Berkeley. Should people like Steve Bannon, Milo Yiannopoulos, Ann Coulter, all noted provocateurs who aim to inspire students to be less tolerant of Jews, Muslims, and gays, should they be tolerated in the public square as they spew animosity and violence against certain groups of people? It's a problem. And so the arguments rage. For speech to be free, all speech has to be free. We can't pick and choose what speech we will allow. And then we also hear hate speech or speech that incites fear and violence simply cannot be allowed. Now, I'm pretty sure that we are divided amongst ourselves as to the limits of free speech. And, of course, the big question is, can a democratic society ever limit the First Amendment and still call itself a free and democratic society? But yet I wonder if any of our minds have been changed since Charlottesville, which raised the concern, at least for me, that the First Amendment cannot be a shield for violence. Tolerance poses no heartburn for conservative members of Congress. Since they are in power, they determine the limits of tolerance. They do not hesitate to communicate who is inside the tent and who is out. The new tax reform bill goes to actually an extreme in discriminating how benefits of the tax bill will flow to improve the lot of only a few wealthy citizens inside the tent. The president's retweet of an anti-Muslim propaganda video produced by the British right-wing extremist group made it clear in no uncertain terms where he draws the line when it comes to the virtue of tolerance. Now, a huge dilemma for liberals, however, perhaps even one of the great pitfalls of liberal philosophy, is stretching the virtue of tolerance to the point where it will eschew all standards and admit everyone into the tent, failing to place any limits in the realm of the acceptable. Just raise the tent. Everybody come on in. Liberalism is defined by its assumptions. The goal of life is to pursue the good as each individual conceives it. The goal of society is to help each individual pursue her or his own good, as long as that pursuit does not unfairly interfere with the pursuit of others. And the way to accomplish this social goal is to establish fair procedures and fair rules by which everybody can play. Now, liberalism's failure, as far as I can see, is offering no overarching vision of what the good society really looks like. Instead, liberals offer procedures and guidelines and a lot of faith that at some point in time, perhaps when the kingdom of God arrives, everyone will eventually be playing by the right rules. To show the danger of this kind of liberal philosophy, I want to quote one of the more famous, maybe even a little notorious, justices of all times, and that, of course, is Oliver Wendell Holmes. When he was asked if a free society should place any limits on the advocacy of dictatorship, he replied, and I quote, "If in the long run a belief in dictatorship is destined to be accepted by the community, the only meaning of free speech is that it should be given its chance and have its way." Wow. Do we really believe that? Are we impelled to go so far in tolerating those who are intolerant that we ultimately accept the reactionary urging of shutting down a free society? Dictatorship, yeah, that's free speech, that's what we want. But even if we choose another word, we skip over dictatorship, do we allow the ideology of genocide, ridding the nation of Muslims and Jews? Do we allow that? Do we allow slavery, honoring the heroes of the Confederacy? And of course, that's far more complicated. Do we permit these voices to be heard on college campuses, the public square, social media, etc., etc.? If we set no limits at all, if we set no limits to what is deemed tolerable, we end up with a mindless philosophy signifying nothing. It's empty. The common liberal reticence to set limits on toleration is at the heart of our woes today. Our reticence to set limits on toleration. It comes right to the heart of the problem. Ronald Dworkin, a distinguished political philosopher, wrote, actually just a few years back, he said, "Since the Enlightenment, political philosophers have debated the merits of two rival views about what democracy really is. The first is a majoritarian concept, that a majority of voters should always have the power to do anything it thinks right or in its own interest. The second is communal. It insists that democracy is government of, by, and for, not the majority, but the people as a whole." And I think this latter philosophy is where most of us find ourselves. It's a position where we care more about the common weal, and where people like the young woman I met with cerebral palsy, as well as people of color and women and immigrants, have not only the right to be heard, but also have the means. But this also implies that we progressives need to get busy not only finding the right process for a just world to unfold, but more significantly, shaping a vision of the world that we want to live in. Let's be honest. As liberals, we are more engaged with method than with substance. And yet it is only the vision that can ultimately lead us. Is it possible to build a just society, for example, if citizens are subjected to hatred at every turn? Clearly, that's an impossibility. So we need to arrive at some understanding of just how far we will tolerate those who are intolerant of a multicultural society where we insist everyone must have a voice. But first, we need to own the vision of the kind of society. What does it look like? What does it feel like? We need to own that vision of the society we intend to build, the good life. Now, personally, I have a hard time believing we can obtain such a vision while simultaneously letting everybody into the tent. And yet I'm also well aware of needing to reconcile the twin dangers of tolerance, guarding against both repression on the one hand and a totally mindless and vacuous liberal philosophy on the other. Now, nobody said this is going to be easy. All I'm asking for this morning is a chance for us to rethink. Let us put our minds to this and rethink the dilemma posed to liberals in this era of untenable right-wing repression. How much infusion of hate will we tolerate in our public discourse today? When are we willing to acknowledge that there needs to be limits to tolerance? There need to be limits to tolerance. Tolerance is far less a matter of virtuous principle. Tolerance is a matter of power. And our goal has to include making that power available, making that power accessible to all who live in the margins of our society. Just the beginning. Our conversation, I hope, will surely continue. Let us close our service, turning our hymn books, please, to number 187. Please be seated. Our closing words this morning really are kind of a short summary of what I think is really the big questions for our time, especially for liberals. So I just want to do kind of a quick recap here. Free speech is paramount in a free society, but it also must be contextualized. A well-funded machinery stands in place right now, ready to harass journalists and academics. Several black professors have been threatened with lynching, shooting, or rape for denouncing white supremacy. Police arrive with tanks and full weapons at anti-racist protests, but not at white supremacist rallies. Carte blanche free speech only fuels right-wing First Amendment hypocrisy. We need to know that now the power of speech remains proportional to wealth in this country. May liberal philosophy grow more circumspect as it must examine the limits of tolerance. So be it. Should have stayed standing. David, thanks so very much. So we have a chance now for looking at some of the wares from Uganda, our giving tree, and of course, coffee itself. And I look forward to this coffee hour very much because I am going to be quiet and I'm very anxious to listen to your opinions, comments, and feedback. So let's break for some coffee and good conversation.